سمپوزیوم خاورمیانه بهار ایران، موانع و فرصتها و سیاست آمریکا. مقامات ارشد نظامی، سیاسی و آکادمیک دولت‌های اوباما، بوش و کلینتون علیه جابجایی ساکنان اشرف در داخل عراق، تأکید بر مسئولیت آمریکا در حفاظت اشرف و ضرورت خروج مجاهدین از لیست وزارت خارجه. ادوارد رندل، فرماندار پنسیلوانیا 2002-2011، رئیس انجمن سراسری فرمانداران آمریکا 2008-2009، رئیس کمیته سراسری حزب دموکرات 2000. ژنرال جیمز تری کانوی، فرمانده نیروی تفنگداران دریایی آمریکا 2006-2010. آنیتا مکبراید، دستیار رئیس جمهور جورج بوش 2005-2009. توگو وست، وزیر ارتش 1993-1997. سارا سوال، عضو هیئت سیاستگذاری وزارت دفاع، استاد سیاست خارجی، دانشکده دولت، دانشگاه هاروارد، رئیس استادان در پروژه پاسخ به جنایات گسترده. لوئی فری، رئیس اداره تحقیقات فدرال 1993-2001. سفیر میچل ریس، مدیر سیاستگذاری وزارت خارجه 2003-2005، نماینده ویژه در ایرلند شمالی. ژنرال شلتون، رئیس ستاد مشترک ارتش آمریکا 1997-2001 و هوارد دین، رئیس حزب دموکرات 2004-2009، کاندیدای ریاست جمهوری.
روز شنبه 25 تیر ماه 16 ژوئیه به مناسبت سالگرد حکم دادگاه استیناف واشنگتن مبنی بر نقض حقوق مجاهدین در لیست گذاری توسط وزارت خارجه و دستور دادگاه برای بازبینی جدید، مقامات ارشد نظامی، سیاسی و آکادمیک دولت‌های اوباما، بوش و کلینتون در یک سمپوزیوم تحت عنوان بهار خاورمیانه و ایران، موانع و فرصتها و سیاست آمریکا سخنرانی کردند. سخنرانان بر ضرورت حذف نام مجاهدین از لیست وزارت خارجه آمریکا و مسئولیت ایالات متحده برای حفاظت از اشرف تأکید کردند.
Good morning and welcome. My name is Mitchell Reese and I'm the president of Washington College. The title of today's session is The Middle East, Iran Spring, Obstacles, Opportunities, and U.S. Policy. Today we're gathered once again to bear witness and to speak out in defense of the people at Camp Ashraf and their continuing fight for freedom and dignity and justice. In the past few months, sadly, we have seen some discouraging developments. We have seen the increasing assertion of Iranian influence in the region and inside Iraq. And we have seen American influence with the Maliki government decline as the United States draws down its forces by the end of this year. But in the past few months, we have also seen some encouraging developments as well. Developments which allow us to take heart, to hope that the people at Camp Ashraf will one day soon receive the freedom and dignity they justly deserve. We've seen Congress become more actively and directly engaged on this issue. We've seen congressional hearings and the promise of ongoing investigations into the brutal treatment of Camp Ashraf's residents by the Iraqi government and the delisting of the MEK. We have seen a Spanish court draw international attention to those Iraqi officials responsible for the murders at Camp Ashraf this past April. We've seen a greater appreciation by the international community that negotiations are not possible with the Iranian regime over its nuclear weapons ambitions. We've seen a greater willingness by some American officials to assign direct responsibility to Iran for its actions, including the recent statement by Admiral Michael Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who said that, quote, Iran is very directly supporting extremist Shia groups which are killing our troops, unquote. And finally, all of us here today, in the audience and on this podium, are determined to continue to fight for the people at Camp Ashraf. As I've said before, this is not a partisan issue. We have on the podium before you a remarkable group of dedicated public servants from across the political spectrum and from all branches of the American government. Whatever our political affiliation, it has no bearing today, as we are unified, shoulder to shoulder, in our effort to help right this wrong, to delist the MEK, and to help the people at Camp Ashraf. Our first speaker this morning will be General Hugh Shelton. General Shelton became the 14th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on October 1, 1997, and served 2 terms as a principal military advisor to Presidents Clinton and Bush. General Shelton has been honored with a Congressional Gold Medal, as well as 4 Defense Distinguished Service Medals, 2 Army Distinguished Service Medals, the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star Medal for Valor, and the Purple Heart. In addition, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II in 2001. Please join me in welcoming General Shelton.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your very kind words, and thank you for a very warm welcome. It is truly great to be with you here in Washington today and to join such a distinguished group of colleagues. I'd also like to offer greetings to the residents of Camp Ashraf that may be watching or may see this later on. You know, there have been some substantive changes that have occurred in the political landscape and in the challenges that the Ashraf residents face since I last spoke to you or this group in May of this year. But some things have not changed. First is the United States guarantee of protection for the residents of Camp Ashraf. It is a commitment that we as a nation made and that we must honor if we are to sustain our reputation as a great nation and one that can be trusted to honor its commitments. As we all know, the residents of Camp Ashraf are individuals that provided invaluable information to the United States during the war with Iraq at its most critical moments. They are individuals that have placed themselves at great risk, not only themselves but their families as well, by voluntarily giving up their arms when they were asked to do so by the United States, when at that time they were guaranteed protection by us. And as an organization, we must remember that they are the ones that first alerted us to the nuclear programs that had been proposed by the mullahs, and as such, the regime might have those weapons today had it not been for their assistance. The second thing that has not changed is that the current regime in Iran is still the world's largest exporter of terrorism and the greatest threat to peace and stability throughout that region. The ruling Iranian regime is an oppressive regime, as we all know. It's one that mixes theocracy with autocracy and extreme expansionist ideology, and one that continues to defy the international community. It is a regime that is intent on denying their own citizens the freedoms that they desire and that they deserve. The U.S. has encountered elements of this regime in every operation that we have conducted for the last 25 years. And it is a regime that is not there to help another country fight for freedom. It is there to impose their will on that regime whenever they can and wherever they can. We recently heard Secretary of Defense Panetta say or express concern regarding Iran's interference with the Maliki government in Iraq. So I think that now we have, in terms of Admiral Mike Mullins and in Secretary Leon Panetta, two individuals in the Pentagon that fully understand the threat that Iran poses to the region and to the United States' interests. Third is the oppression and the inequality of women by the current regime in Iran has not changed. It is deplorable. We know that women want equality, they want respect and the right to participate in all social and economic events, and they deserve to live their lives in a productive manner, one in which they can live with dignity, one, unfortunately, which is not their lot in Iran today. The current regime's theocratic manner of declaring women as intellectually and physically inferior to men is counter to women's rights, and it's counter to their expectations, as well as what is the right thing to do by that regime. Unfortunately, another thing that has not changed is that the largest, best organized resistance to Iran's current regime, the PMOI or the MEK, is still on the foreign terrorist list here in the United States. Our great ally, the UK, took them off the list in 2008, followed very quickly in 2009 by the EU. In the United States, we have former Ambassador Dale Daly, another colleague who is as the ambassador for counterterrorism to the State Department, and as an individual who commanded our Joint Special Operations Command, who knows more about terrorism and the various organizations in this country than anyone in the State Department today, also previously recommended that the NEK come off the FTO list. Our Congress has passed a resolution encouraging the State Department to take them off. And we've also seen in this process that the State Department, in spite of being told to provide it, has failed to provide any either classified or declassified information that states why the MEK should have been placed on the list in the first place. They also, as we know last week, exceeded the 180 days that they had been given by the court to produce evidence to substantiate their reasons why the MEK is on the list. I say, wake up, State Department. Take the MEK off the FTO list today. We in the United States have continued to fail to acknowledge our commitment to ensure the safety of the Ashraf residents, hiding behind the lame excuse that it is now an Iraqi problem. Ambassador Jeffrey in Iraq, his idea, without any assurance or even any apparent concern, providing rationale as to why this is a good idea other than saying it moves it further away from the Iran border, is appalling. It causes me to stop and wonder, what is this man drinking? The Iranian influence on the Maliki government today has shown us that the Maliki government is incapable of providing the degree of protection for the Ashraf residents that they should be providing. It has shown that the Maliki government has a disdain for the Ashraf residents because we see inhumane treatment of the Ashraf residents on a daily basis, to include the loudspeakers, the psychological warfare that they have been carrying out, as well as the fact that they have continued to not allow the proper degree of medical treatment for the Ashraf residents. And then, of course, we all watched the Maliki-controlled troops as they attacked or slaughtered and injured the unarmed residents of the Camp Ashraf. We either need to send a new ambassador with moral courage who understands America's prior commitments, or we need better oversight and guidance from Washington for that ambassador. Equally appalling to me is the fact that when you look at the fact that we have not used the tools of our national power to make sure that the Ashraf residents who are provided proper medical treatment is absolutely astonishing. We should not forget that the MEK is the best organized, it is the most formidable opposition to the current Iranian regime. It has challenged the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism for the past 32 years. And to me, it is the MEK that provides hope for the current Iranian people. It provides a degree of hope that far exceeds anything else that we here in the United States or our allies can offer short of direct intervention. When you look at the 10-point program, a human rights platform published by President-elect Mrs. Rajavi, which emphasizes the same religious and gender freedoms that are emphasized and advocated by the U.S. Department of State, to me, it makes it a no-brainer. Just how dumb can Ambassador Jeffries or anyone else be to ask an organization of this type to disband itself when all over the world we are supporting groups who stand against ruling dictators that are far less a threat to the United States than the Iranian regime, and in fact dictators that were considered friends of the U.S. in some cases. Why would we not want to put the weight and power of this country behind an organization that we know stands for the same principles that we stand for, and that is the best organized, best led organization to take on the current Iranian regime? It just doesn't make sense. My recommendation would be, first of all, and first and foremost, take the MEK off the list. Secondly, we need to remember that the Ashraf residents are part of the group that the United States recognized as protected citizens under the Fourth Geneva Convention, and that we ourselves provided protection for 6 years. Third, we need to pressure the Iraqis to stop all harassment and suppressive measures against the Ashraf residents today. Fourth, given that the Ashraf residents have accepted relocation as an option, we should let the Iraqis know in no uncertain terms, and by that I mean use maybe some what I would characterize as coercive diplomacy, that forcible displacement inside Iraq is totally unacceptable. We should use the tools of our national power, particularly our diplomatic and our economic tools, to ensure that the Iraqis live up to the commitments that we made to the Ashraf residents if we are not going to do it ourselves. Fifth, we in the United States should step up to our responsibilities and guarantee temporary protection to the residents of Ashraf until they are resettled in third countries. Let me summarize by saying we know that Iran has much stronger and concentrated nationalism than any other country in the Middle East. We know that many other countries in the Middle East look at Iran as a threat, and for good reason. We also know that the MEK provides the best avenue for change, and it's why that Iran considers the MEK as a significant threat to their regime. I would call on Secretary Clinton and Secretary Panetta to acknowledge the U.S. commitment, the promise that we made, the contract that we made with the Ashraf residents to provide for their protection. Let's quit hiding behind the lame excuse that that's now an Iraqi problem. As a reason, that gives us a reason to stand by and watch, and that's not a reason at all. Again, I say use the tools that are available. We've got a very strong economic tool, and we certainly have got diplomatic tools that we can use to adjust Maliki's attitude and his actions toward the residents of Ashraf. We, the United States, as I said before, are a great nation, but we are not in the eyes of the rest of the world if our word is not our bond, and if we do not honor our commitments and our promises. This is a disgrace for America, in my opinion. If President Maliki is so weak that he can't control his armed forces, or if he in essence is using his armed forces to attack, harass, and in the case of April to slaughter the residents of Ashraf, then it's a clear indication that he is nothing more than a puppet for the current Iranian regime. Today it is clear that the current regime in Iran needs to change, and the MEK with their platform of human rights and equality is the one that they fear. We should join the UK and our European allies and remove the MEK from the FTO list, allowing them to continue to bring maximum pressure on the current regime. This, combined with the strength and courage of those individuals living in Iran today who want their freedom, and especially the women and the youth of that country, offers the greatest opportunity for seeing Iran with a government that is sensitive to the needs of the people of Iran, and the greatest opportunity for all the citizens of Iran to enjoy the basic human rights and freedoms that the rest of the free world enjoys. Thank you very much.
Privileged to be here and to be learning so much about the issues of concern to all of us gathered in this room. And I think it's only appropriate to start, because I haven't had a chance to do so, by offering my condolences to all victims of Iranian government violence and terrorism, and particularly to the victims in Camp Ashraf and their families here today. I like to think, because I served for 6 years as the Senior Foreign Policy Advisor to Senator George Mitchell on the Hill, that I have a good appreciation for the politics of international challenges, about the issues of democracy in Iran, about the issues of human rights in Iran, is that often for the United States we see a significant conflict in our foreign policy between the values that America has held dear and indeed was founded upon, and the interests of the United States of America as it plots its foreign policy and manages the affairs of state. And what is extraordinary about this set of issues is that in very important ways, values and interests are joined in a common framework for approaching the questions of Iran and democracy and human rights. So this clash that I often teach about in the conduct of foreign policy, which so often leads to inconsistency, to reversals of fortune, to charges of hypocrisy, actually has an opportunity to be reconciled in the context of the issues that we're talking about today. Now, This is, in many ways, the biggest strength that this community, that the community gathered here today, has as it seeks to galvanize action and draw attention to the very significant challenges in U.S. foreign policy. But it doesn't mean that the practical path is necessarily simple or easy. In that context, I think it's very important for us to remember when we talk about the issues that motivate us that the United States is in a period in which it is really begun to look inward. And so the country comes to this discussion from a perspective of wariness about regime change arguments, wariness about the use of military power, wariness about supporting allies just a little bit in the fear that that commitment will creep over time. And we have to be cognizant of that as we think about urging the United States to do the right thing in this context. And in that vein, I want to talk about two broad issue areas. I want to first talk about the problem of Iran, and then I want to talk about the humanitarian challenge with Camp Ashraf. And as I said, you know, the interesting opportunity that we have that I think falls on very fertile soil in the American political debate is that there is no disagreement about the nature of the Iranian regime. It is abhorrent. And it is not simply abhorrent from a values perspective in terms of the gross violations of human rights and the authoritarian nature of the rule, but it is a real threat to American security, to the security of many of our friends, and to international peace and stability. So there's strong agreement on that fact, but there are also many regimes that fall into a similar category of being abhorrent and being threats to international peace and security. And simply because we can identify a regime as a problem doesn't easily suggest the right and most effective solution to that problem. So one of the caveats that I want to offer as we think about a future free Iran, a future democratic Iran, is that when you look historically at the U.S. experience with regime change, we have many, many, many different models. We have the model of the Cold War, in which the United States chose to deter and chose to poke and prod through proxies, and waited, and waited, and waited, and waited. If you think about the political context in which Ambassador Rees worked, where in Northern Ireland we had a long-standing conflict that had political and military dimension, that also took a long time and led to a negotiated solution. And finally, as I mentioned, in the context of forcible regime change, very uncertain results. The United States, I think, in both Afghanistan and Iraq has learned that, that war often has many unintended consequences, and that so one of the challenges for this community and for us all going forward is to help think creatively about what I have heard this community describe as the third way. So one of the challenges is to flesh that out and to explain in greater detail second and third order consequences, the specifics of how you would achieve it, the groundwork for moving forward in this alternative that reflects where Washington is today and offers a pragmatic and hopeful future for your movement, your cause, and for Iranians in the country and worldwide. But secondly, I think the humanitarian issues are ones in which there is broad consensus. And again, not a simple set of solutions. And so the academic in me that seeks consistency and seeks to look at the long-term benefits of different courses of action cautions us to not downplay the complexities that you all live and breathe vis-a-vis Camp Ashraf. But at base, it's very, very simple. And this is, I think, the strongest point to move forward at this moment, because we are at risk of an extraordinary humanitarian crisis by the end of this year unless we are able to rally the international community to step up to the plate. And here I do think the United States bears a special responsibility. I do not think that we can regardless of the legality, hide behind Iranian sovereignty to escape the moral obligation that comes from the history that we have had with Camp Ashraf. That is a significant concern. And the cold-blooded murder of unarmed people is wrong no matter where it happens and no matter who commits it. It is simply wrong. It is anti-democratic, it is anti-American, it is against international law, it is wrong. And so that piece is very, very simple. Now, a lot of my work has been on preventing mass atrocity. Mass atrocity is the slaughter of unarmed civilians. That is what has happened in Camp Ashraf, and it is wrong. And I commend to you a small book on mass atrocity response operations that I put together with some colleagues from the U.S. Peacekeeping Institute. It's available on the web, but it talks about the challenges of responding to mass atrocity. And here, I think, is a place for us to roll up our sleeves and dig in. This is a very powerful tool for focusing attention and for galvanizing resources and commitment. And I think it is a place that the Camp Ashraf impending crisis cries out for analysis. And I would urge you to spend some time trying to think in very concrete terms about what would be required in the event that a political solution is not attained beforehand. So I guess what I would like to say in conclusion is that I do see a very special American responsibility to ensure the safety of those in Camp Ashraf until their final status is determined. And clearly it needs to be a priority to determine that final status, to work not simply with our erstwhile allies, the Iraqi government, which has been perpetrating these crimes, but also with our European friends and the international community. Because sovereignty is an important value, but it's not the only value, and the practice of foreign policy is about reconciling competing values. And here, in the case of our interests and our humanitarian values, we have a very clear call to action to focus attention on this and do it now. And if values and interests, when combined, are the most powerful call to action, you have an extraordinary narrative to tell. It needs to be explained in a way that can be heard in the context of a town and a country that is dealing with many challenges. But you have humanitarian arguments on your side, you have values on your side, and they call for action in the context of very clear American interests in ultimately changing the nature of Iranian governance to allow for democracy and freedom for the Iranian people. And so I look forward to continuing the dialogue with you about, practically speaking, how we might do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mitch, and thank you, the organization from Northern California, for sponsoring this very important forum. I was just in the United Kingdom, and I'm sure some of you have seen it, the wartime bunker of Winston Churchill, and his words, never, never, never surrender. And I want to compliment you and your colleagues, Mrs. Rajavi, and particularly the residents and victims in Camp Ashraf. And you are leading the fight for freedom in Iran. You fight in a much more difficult and much more dangerous place. And we compliment you on your bravery. We offer our condolences for your sacrifices, but we offer you our encouragement. Churchill also said once that the Americans could be counted upon to do the right thing in the end after they've exhausted every other possibility. Well, that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit today, briefly, if I might. My association with this issue really goes back to 1996, the Khobar bombing, which you remember took place in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. At about that time, there was a change of policy in the administration, and the idea was that there was a new moderate president recently installed in Tehran, and the United States would take serious efforts to develop that relationship. And we began to get, in the FBI, directions in that regard, which we accepted. For instance, I got a call one day from the Secretary of State complaining that the FBI was photographing and fingerprinting the Iranian wrestlers who were coming into the United States. And then Khobar Towers happened. 19 Americans were killed. General Shelton, you and I sat in on meetings around this town in the aftermath of that. And we conducted an investigation where police officers were investigators. We're not politicians, we're not diplomats. And very quickly into the investigation, it became clear that although the attack was operationally performed by the Hezbollah in Saudi Arabia, the attack was organized, planned, funded, and executed by the IRGC. They had gotten the passports for the operators. They had funded them with cash. The general in the IRGC who was in charge of the project sat in the embassy, the Iranian embassy in Damascus, and gave them their passports. So we took all this information, this is 1996, now into 1997, and we presented it to the administration. I actually presented it to the National Security Advisor. And his reaction, I got a lot of different reactions around town the 9 years I was director. This was perhaps the most interesting one. When I told him that the IRGC and the Iranian government had murdered 19 Americans in the bombing at Khobar, his response was, well, who else knows about this? And I said, well, several dozen FBI agents, the Attorney General of the United States, and I think we should move to the U.S. Attorney's Office and procure an indictment. That was not on the agenda, and I respect that. Again, the issue was to try to develop a relationship with this regime. It didn't work, obviously, and in 1997, the MEK was put on the Foreign Terrorist Organization list at the request of the Iranian government and to appease the Iranian government. That bad decision has persisted for 14 years. In the Bush administration, and I have many friends in both administrations, I served in one, obviously, actually I served in two, technically, the offer came, again, to the United States government that the Iranian regime would control the operational use of improvised explosive devices in Iraq, and American soldiers, American service men and women would be protected. And that sounded like a really good idea, so we kept them on the list for another bunch of years. That obviously did not happen either. And as one of my colleagues said, more Americans killed in June of this year than last year, precisely as a result of this IED operation run by the Iranian regime. So the United States has not gotten a very good bargain in 14 years. And this group is not a terrorist group. As my colleagues have said, the MEK, the PMOI, however you want to define them, is not a terrorist group. Do you think for a moment that the likes of the people on this panel would be here if there was even a remote possibility that this organization was a foreign terrorist organization? By the way, you know, we all keep contacts with our associations and our agencies. No one has come up to me or any of my colleagues from their current agencies and said, you know, I don't think you should be doing this. This is a bad organization. This is an organization that has terrorist intent or capability. That's not happened. No one, as far as I know, my colleagues also, we've not been notified by the Department of Justice that we are suspected of providing material assistance to a foreign terrorist organization. The reason is it's not a foreign terrorist organization except by the virtue of this bad decision that listed it and persisted. On the urgency issue, which is the second point I want to make, we are running substantially out of time here. I don't believe and I don't have confidence in the State Department process. In fact, I would not even call it a process. And my hope is that the people in the State Department who are working this issue, working is not the right word, would pay some attention to the words of our new Secretary of Defense who recently said, damn it, make a decision. The decision here this is not a complicated legal or factual issue. I've looked at all the facts that the State Department, at least, has agreed to provide. And the court, which is, by the way, 1 year ago today, the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia found that the Department of State had violated the constitutional due process rights of the MEK. Violated the constitutional due process rights because they engaged in a legal and fact-finding process that did not verify the credibility of its sources, did not provide the information to the plaintiff, the MEK, to respond to, and sent it back to the Department of State and said, you have to do it again. What's been going on for that year is an absolute legal disgrace. Absolute legal disgrace. I used to do this for a living. I used to be on one side of the bench. For a while, I actually sat on the bench. The Court of Appeals specifically directed the Secretary of State to review the decision and report back to the court. They have well surpassed any semblance of regularity or due process in that review. And I think the review borders now on bad faith, my opinion. If I was a judge, which I'm not, and unfortunately this is before no judge at the moment, because the Court of Appeals, which is not a trial judge, sent it back to the administrative agency for a review. If this was before a trial judge, ladies and gentlemen, that judge would haul the State Department into a hearing, into a show cause hearing, why it should not be held in contempt of the court for delaying, without any justified basis, the completion of the court's direction. We spend a lot of time on the facts. Let me just mention a couple of them. The State Department is going through a process now. It's not a process. It's a slow. What they do is they assemble a bunch of documents. There's 10 of them here in front of me. I'm not going to take the time to go over them with you. Then they give them to the plaintiff. They give them to the MEK and their lawyers, and they say, comment on these. And they comment on them, and then they say, thank you for your comments. We now have to review your comments. But the importance is the irrelevance and the ridiculousness of these documents. Some of them, for instance, are press releases, which, by the way, the State Department had classified as classified documents. It's a press release. It's a press article. One of them... Then what they did is they interviewed a bunch of Iranian nationals applying for visas at U.S. consulates around the world and said, well, what do you think of the MEK? This is during the interview. So, of course, the State Department that's interviewing me has listed this organization as a terrorist organization. I would like to get a visa to go to the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, what do you think they're going to say? So they take that information and they present it and they ask for comments. So this process is going on and on and on. Unfortunately, there's not a trial judge who can bring them into court and hold them into contempt. And unfortunately, we're running out of time. The last thing I'm going to say, Governor, hasn't been said here, but I think it's very important to say it. This is not just a case of the Department of State and the U.S. government not acting. It's not just the fact that they have not made this decision. The fact that they have maintained this organization improperly without legal or factual basis on the foreign terrorist organization list has given the Iranian regime, through its proxy in Baghdad, a license to kill. We saw that, and I think you've seen the videos, absolute documented war crimes of the Iraqi regime using, by the way, U.S. weapons, Iraqi police officers using equipment and training given to them by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, coming in and massacring innocent, unarmed freedom fighters, using as the basis of its justification the fact that the United States government lists these people as terrorists. A couple of our Congress members just recently met with President Maliki, and he reminded them in no uncertain terms, your government calls these people terrorists. And on again, when you see these arrests in Tehran, the ones that make it over the wall into the international media, they regularly arrest people and use as a basis for detention, conviction, and execution the fact that they are members, alleged members of this organization. So the indecision here is not just an indecision, it is a facilitation of this regime through its proxy in Baghdad, unfortunately, murdering and killing. And we have an ambassador who ingeniously now suggests that they ought to move the people out because they're posing a danger by being on the Iranian border. The only thing I have to say in conclusion is I've been involved in this issue for some time. I am very frustrated. I am very disappointed with our Department of State, and I'm very disappointed with our government. The United States has a moral and legal obligation to act here. These people are protected under the 4th Geneva Convention. The U.S. has a promise in writing to protect them and to defer to President Maliki and his masters in Tehran who fear this organization. Why do they fear the organization? Because it's the only credible, effective, freedom-fighting force that threatens their regime. So we call on our government to act quickly before it's too late, and to give the support to these freedom fighters that law and justice requires. Thank you.